Man, it's been a good while since we had a Generation 1 Pokemon, huh? Now, it's not a huge surprise that when we return to Gen 1, it'd be with evolutions, though. It's no secret just how popular these things are. Zane's told me Jolteon was always his favorite evolution because it saved him in a Pokemon Stadium run with Pin Missile of all things. I feel like no one dislikes Jolteon. It's a pretty high-ranking evolution in everyone's list. As you might have guessed, Jolteon's shown up in the anime tons of times just because Eevee is so popular. Every few years, a new generation of kids can get exposed to Eevee and its entire highly marketable family. Although most of us Season 1 kids will remember the Jolteon owned by Sparky in the anime. So Jolteon shows up pretty often, but we're not here to talk about the other evolutions, just Jolteon. So let's find out how good was Jolteon actually. And in this video, we'll be discussing these competitive formats. Oh man, Gen 1 means I get to talk about Nintendo Cup again. Jolteon was one of the most popular Pokemon in the game. In fact, in the finals of the first Nintendo Cup, Jolteon was tied for the most picked Pokemon among the 15 finalists, along with the king of Red, Blue, and Yellow, Tauros. This is due to some pretty interesting stuff. In the original Japanese Pokemon Red and Green, Blizzard was even more absurdly powerful than in the later Gen 1 games, having a 30% chance of freeze. This meant that ice types like Jynx and Lapras dominated their meta, forcing later staples Rhydon and Golem out. And with no ground types to, well, ground its electricity, Jolteon leapt to the forefront as a premier sweeper and the best electric type, as Zapdos suffered from the icy climate as well. Even when Blizzard got nerfed, Jolteon had a case for being one of the best sweepers in the game. Its spot as best electric type was usurped by Zapdos, but Jolteon's blistering speed of 130 put it tied for second fastest Pokemon in the entire game, only after Electrode. All the evolutions got 130 in a single stat, but that speed was easily the best pairing for the frightening 110 special stat they all had as well, which allowed Jolteon to easily outclass Electrode. With speed like that, Jolteon was arguably the best late game sweeper in the game after Tauros. Anything that normally wouldn't die to a powerful Thunderbolt still had a pretty good chance of getting critted, because as a reminder, crits in Gen 1 are based on speed. The only thing that could really stop Jolteon were the aforementioned ground types, but here's where its other biggest asset, its move pool, came into play. Although Jolteon was a good special sweeper, it usually only ran carrying a single special attack, Thunderbolt. Other slots were reserved for Thunder Wave, a staple in Red, Blue, and Yellow, and its incredibly useful coverage moves in Pin Missile, Double Kick, and Body Slam. Pin Missile existed to hit grass types like Exeggutor and Victreebel, and remember in Gen 1, Bug was actually super effective against Poison. So all these grass poison types really didn't like getting hit by Pin Missile. And of course, there are also the Psychic types too, just in case you needed to hit one of those. Double Kick and Body Slam were niche, but had their uses against ground types. Body Slam could paralyze on the switch, and with 2 crits, Jolteon could potentially do around 35% damage to the rock and ground types, so at least it wasn't completely useless. Jolteon's primary counters were the ones I just mentioned, but it also didn't match up super well against special walls like Chansey and Snorlax. While Double Kick was super effective, without a crit it wouldn't do much, and Chansey could status and heal up with Soft Boiled, and Snorlax had Earthquake. Paralysis from Body Slam would make Jolteon almost completely useless unless it had agility for that specific situation. It's also worth mentioning that in Pokemon Stadium, Jolteon is significantly better, although most if not all competitive matches are played on the Game Boy game. This is because Focus Energy actually works correctly. In Red, Blue, and Yellow, Focus Energy would either leave your critical hit rate unchanged or actually lower it if your speed was lower than the enemy, which of course wasn't likely but still sucked. With a properly working Focus Energy, Jolteon was almost guaranteed critical hits, meaning its status as a sweeper was even more terrifying. With only a few counters and amazing stats, Jolteon was easily an overuse, though it was a step below the most dominant Pokemon in the meta, and it was S tier in Nintendo Cup. Jolteon lost 15 special defense in the special split, but it had bigger problems going into Gen 2. As in literally, Raikou was like a bigger version of it. With more bulk and rest, Raikou had phasing potential, which easily made up for the 15 speed difference it had compared to Jolteon, a gap that was really only relevant against uncommon picks like Crobat, Dugtrio, and Alakazam. Outclassed in the attacking department, Jolteon had to find another niche, especially as it now stood no chance against the behemoth Snorlax. Luckily it did, and if you've watched our other evolution videos, you might have an idea of what it is. All evolutions had access to Baton Pass, and Jolteon was one of its only viable users in GSC along with its brethren. While Vaporeon and Espeon relied on passing growth, Umbreon was used for mean look passing, and Flareon did nothing. Jolteon was focused on passing its defining stat, speed. Thunderbolt and Hidden Power Water let Jolteon handle the most popular phasers in Suicune, Rhydon, and Skarmory. Though if Jolteon came up against its replacement Raikou, it was in trouble. The ability to fight phasers was crucial, as it let Jolteon pass speed or substitute to hugely powerful Pokemon who needed support, like Charizard, or more commonly, Marowak. Jolt Whack was a terrifying combo if pulled off correctly. Marowak needed support, but it had a terrifyingly instantly threatening attack of 508 because of Thick Club, and if it got Sword Dance up, it could be curtains. As such, the best Jolteon counters needed to be able to handle not just Jolteon, but also Marowak. This meant that while Blissey, Ampharos, and Snorlax were nominally great, they could also be in trouble if Jolteon got its pass off. Well, to be honest, Snorlax usually did fine because he's Snorlax. Exeggutor was actually one of the best counters since it handled Marowak nicely, but then if a Charizard popped out, you might be really screwed. This is what let Jolteon stay in overuse. The unpredictability of Baton Pass meant it could potentially end any team right quick. In Nintendo Cup, where teams were comprised of 3 Pokemon, this didn't work quite as well, and so Jolteon was only B- tiered there, outclassed entirely by the other electric types. Raikou's receival of Calm Mind in Gen 3 sealed its superiority as a main electric attacker when compared to Jolteon, but the 15 speed that hadn't really mattered the generation before was suddenly monumental, and it's because of one of those uncommon picks we mentioned before. With its new ability Arena Trap, Dugtrio suddenly became one of the most threatening Pokemon in the game, and this means it became an amazing threat to Raikou, as even if Raikou predicted the switch with a super effective hidden power, it only had a 37% chance to one-hit KO, and if it didn't, your Raikou was 100% dead. Jolteon's ability to outspeed meant it could win against Dugtrio if it predicted correctly, and more importantly, it could Baton Pass out of Arena Trap. This gave it an amazing designation as one of the only electric types that could beat Dugtrio, along with Zapdos. As such, Jolteon could play a powerful scouting role, as it forced switches incredibly frequently with its powerful attacks, and it loved switches, because if predicted correctly, it was a chance to throw up a substitute and swap out to something else. This was like Volt Switch before Volt Switch, letting Jolteon hold momentum near indefinitely. Now, if you've watched our Umbreon, Espeon, or Smeargle videos, you know that Gen 3 was where the trouble with Baton Pass started to kick off. Jolteon was not, however, used in most full Baton Pass teams, as it didn't bring anything that Ninjask, or if you needed a replacement, Zapdos, didn't. It was a different breed of Baton Passer, spurred on by its ability Volt Absorb, which gave Jolteon even more momentum in the ability to gain some HP and switching freely on electric type attacks. When it came to countering Jolteon, true counters depended on the type of hidden power. Steelix was one of the few Pokemon that wasn't weak to any common Jolteon set, and Swampert worked against those carrying hidden power Ice, while Flygon and Celebi did well if Jolteon was packing hidden power Grass. There were a lot of Pokemon that could go up one-on-one with it, like Snorlax, Blissey, and Regice, but stopping it from passing was another matter. The best way to beat it was to be ready for its passes, forcing it into an unfavorable matchup once it didn't have a pivot to rely on. Jolteon required precise play, but if used well, it did its job easily and it was hard to prepare for. Traits that landed it once again in overused. Gen 4 really is a big changing point, huh? Aside from the obvious physical special split, the introduction of Choice Scarf, Specs, Life Orb, and a bunch of other items really gave some Pokemon the variety they needed to be effective, or just straight up boosts. With Choice Specs, Jolteon could once again leverage its speed and special attack, being even more attractive than Raikou. Raikou needed a Scarf to get just over a speed benchmark to relevancy, but Jolteon's natural speed was more than adequate to justify using a Specs set. Thunderbolt, Shadow Ball, or Signal Beam, and as always, a choice of hidden power made for quite the threatening special sweeper. And in an homage to its previous role, Baton Pass could be used even on the choice set so that Jolteon could scout effectively and escape Dugtrio or Pursuit users. If variety was needed, Jolteon could also pair Life Orb and Charge Beam. Since Jolteon's natural speed was enough to be an effective revenge killer, it could switch in for a low risk chance at a Charge Beam boost, after which it would be a times 1.95 power on all attacks. Sure, this set still struggled with special walls, but if those were removed, Jolteon could easily hit every Pokemon in the game for pretty massive damage after boosts. And of course, Substitute plus Baton Pass was still absolutely an option, as was a niche moveset based on Yawn that existed to hamper Jolteon's usual counters by putting them to sleep on the switch. While Jolteon certainly appreciated the ability to exert offensive presence once again due to its new items, those sets were also more easily threatened than Baton Pass. Again, this usually was dependent on the hidden power used. Ice meant losses to Swampert and Mamoswine, while Grass meant a bad matchup against Flygon and Gliscor. Baton Pass or Yawn sets sacrificing covers were walled by Celebi, and Electivire's Motor Drive meant a switch into Thunderbolt resulted in a quick earthquake to the face. In general though, Jolteon was a solid choice. Its main problem was lack of attacking power compared to the other powerhouses like Heatran or Gengar. While it had coverage moves to fill out its moveset, it was decidedly limited past that. So once you figured out the set, you knew what it was going for. And if you guessed wrong, it usually wasn't too big of a problem. But it was still easily one of the best electric types in the game, and sat comfortably in overuse. Jolteon stayed doing what it did best in Gen 5. The meta became slightly more unfriendly as Thundurus provided steep competition, and Jolteon finally added Volt Switch to its arsenal. A a move that fits like a glove, and then it absolutely didn't need Baton Pass on attacking sets anymore. The weather-based metagame was a mixed bag. In Rain, Thunder provided Jolteon a much-needed power boost, and it was there that it was most seen. As such, it also struggled against other weathers, where Thunder became about as accurate as Zap Cannon. Specifically, Tyranitar did very well against Thunder variants of Jolteon, necessitating Signal Beam as a way to deal with Sandstream. Item choices for attacking Jolteon included Choice Specs, Life Orb, and Expert Belt. It really just depended on what you value, but its power and speed frequently forced switches, and of course that let in room for its other set, Substitute and Baton Pass, which functioned the same as it always had. Threaten a Pokemon, sub on the switch, and feel free to do whatever you want at that point. As always, Blissey was the biggest Jolteon threat, and Gen 5 added Eviolite Chansey to the mix. The aforementioned Ferrothorn was the closest thing to a hard counter Jolteon maybe ever encountered, as even if it was a substitute Jolteon, Ferrothorn could happily throw down hazards. The choice set was susceptible to ground, grass, or dragon types that could tank an electric type move. Finally, priority choice Scarf users punched holes through Jolteon's poor defenses, but Jolteon persisted, and as always was a solid overused choice. Jolteon's few VGC appearances came in 5th gen VGC. While Thundurus mostly outclassed Jolteon, Jolteon's speed was the one reason to use it. It was extremely hard to get Jolteon in without taking advantage of Voltazorb, and once it was in, it could potentially wreak some havoc with a Thunder Gem or a Focus Sash by getting off a guaranteed 1 or 2 attacks due to its speed. There's not much to say here though. Earthquake and priority physical moves like Sucker Punch and Mach Punch made VGC very unfriendly territory for Jolteon, and I can only find a few mentions of it ever doing well in tournament, the main one being top 8 at UK Nationals and Seniors in 2013, although we don't have much information after that. Raikou spent 2 generations languishing in borderline and underused, but Gen 6 boosted it back into overuse as Talonflame became the bird everyone loved to hate. While Jolteon and Raikou share the same typing, Jolteon's paper-thin defenses meant even with resistances, it couldn't stand up to the bird spam from Talonflame or Aeolite Mega Pinsir. What's more, if you wanted an incredibly fast electric type, Mega Manectric outperformed Jolteon in every way, boasting a better move pool with Overheat, higher speed and special attack, and an arguably more universal useful ability Intimidate, all for the cost of 1 Megastone. As such, Jolteon was left high and dry, falling all the way to rarely used. Power creep meant even underused was a rough environment as the amount of counters for Jolteon grew even higher. Underused had Florges, Blissey, Shaman, Celebi, and Scarf Hydreigon. Jolteon still saw play in underused, but it certainly wasn't a top threat, but at least its Baton Pass set wasn't banned. Baton Pass was only banned in chains, and with boosted moves that affected 2 stats, but even that subset didn't see much use, as Jolteon simply couldn't force switches the same way anymore. And as for doubles, while that same power creep didn't do wonders for Jolteon in VGC, it did see some minimal Gen 6 usage. Actually, it made top 8 at Nationals in the junior division at the hands of Gwen Edgar. Previous Jolteon variants in VGC focused on the more standard single target attacking, but Gwen's existed as part of a Disc-Quake combo with Garchomp. And that's it, so how good was Jolteon actually? For most of its life, really good. Jolteon is the quintessential fast and frail electric type, packing exactly what you would expect, speed and power. It has a pretty small move pool, but what it does have works. Or worked for a while. The ability to threaten offensively and simultaneously take advantage of switches with Baton Pass and Substitute meant that what should be a pretty linear Pokemon actually had a surprising amount of depth. These days, Power Creep finally caught up to Jolteon, but it outran it for a while with that 130 speed. Thanks for watching everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and of course, as I always say, comment on what Pokemon you want to see next. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to all of you watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, and that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.